Now I'd like to reintroduce Jessica Moore-Jones, who's going to talk about behavioural economics for animal shelters. Thank you.
So I think they got everything in the wrong order, but so this morning's was behavioural economics. This session is actually trying to put yesterday's and today's into kind of practical use. Okay, so what we did, or what I tried to do, was come up with an example that I thought might be relevant to the maximum amount of people in the room. So I used volunteering. It's probably not the most exciting, I'm not going to lie. I've done this with organisations on everything from how to get dairy farmers to increase how much milk they're feeding to their calves, through to Massey University, how to get students more interested in topics that they don't want to be interested in, through to vet clinics, how to get owners to comply with the instructions their vets are giving them. So you can take this process and apply it to everything. So if you don't have volunteers in your organisation, or if your volunteer organisation is just totally awesome, while I step through the process, don't think volunteers. Think about whatever your problem is, and I promise you the process works for pretty much everything that requires a human behaviour change. So, Damien. There we go. Okay, so we'll go with this. So, the process. How do we actually take all of these fun things and put it into real use? Okay, now this process is not peer-reviewed. This is not in an article somewhere. This is the process I use and that I step through with organisations and that I find to be the most successful. So the first one is properly define the desired outcome. Now that sounds like the easiest step, right? I promise you it's not, okay? The biggest reason being that your business outcome is not the same as your behaviour outcome. A lot of people find themselves accidentally trying to do a behaviour change process on, I need to increase volunteers numbers, and you're trying to behaviour change yourself. Thank you. Which basically, we all need some behaviour change interventions, but you really need to make sure that your behaviour change outcome has a person who needs to do the thing and has an action, not an awareness, not a knowledge, not an increase, anything that is education. I'm sorry. It's about an action. Okay, step 2, identify your target audience. Now, the more narrow your target audience, the more successful your intervention will be. Okay, so if we're trying to do something like a desexing, how do I get more people in the community to desex their animals? You can do a behaviour change on my community. But you have so many different reasons in there why they're not doing it, that the more broad, the less successful, always. So what you should ideally be doing if you're doing this properly is going, okay, so my target audience is my community, which includes low socioeconomic people in my community, that includes elderly people in my community, that includes young families, that includes, if my community includes rural Aboriginal communities, and all of these kind of different people that can't be treated as the same because their barriers are not the same. Which brings us to barriers to change. Now, for each target group, you want to be identifying, why aren't they doing it? Don't assume. We always get it wrong. We are middle-aged, educated, people who care and who know this industry. What you think is the reason people are not doing it almost never is the reason that people are not doing it. Please don't assume this. Have some people in the room who are from this target audience, okay? Now, what you'll notice, though, is that you could have multiple target audiences with multiple barriers to change and multiple potential solutions. So if you've done this process right, you should end up with like a giant tree of solutions. Okay, and it's exhausting and it's time consuming, and frankly, behaviour change sounds fun, but it's so boring doing this part. All right, you got to do it properly if you really want this to work. You can't just skip the steps and make assumptions. Okay, so we've identified barriers to change. We engage our stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? everybody, generally. Okay, so the most important is people from that target audience. The IKEA effect, if they are not involved in building it, they will not come. I promise you, okay? You are better to implement a not quite perfect solution that lots of people take up than a perfect solution that nobody uses. So if you have to give away control in order to engage your stakeholders, give it away. You might not get the solution that in your mind is the perfect solution, but they will actually do it, and that's more valuable. Other stakeholders obviously are going to be your team or the people who are able to help you deliver this. Ideation, I love that word. This is the fun part. You get to sit in a room, you get to do blue sky. Now, do not ever limit this conversation to sensible ideas or to within budget constraints, okay? I can promise you that whoever came up with, you know, the neo-Nazi refugee thing, sorry for those that weren't here yesterday, fun example, ask me later. If you weren't in the room, I promise you that they didn't sit in a room and go, oh, how are we going to do this? Oh, no, too big, too expensive. They sat and they probably brainstormed 500 ideas before they went, that one's quite cool. Or they probably came up with something totally different and then amended and amended and amended. Go blue sky, go nuts, okay? And then the next step is the ease versus impact chart, which I'll show you then. That's how you narrow down your huge blue sky thinking. Notice at the step 5, the ideation stage, you need to decide, does it matter why the behavior changed? So that really important thing, if you only need them to do the thing once, all solutions are open to you. If you need them to do the things sustainably, you really need to stick with your solutions that affect values, beliefs, and attitudes. Make sense? Okay, next part, test it. Don't implement a multi-million-dollar thing without testing it on a couple of $1,000s first. Big mistakes, okay, because lots of assumptions are wrong. We did this process for increasing Cupcake Day fundraising at RSPCA Darwin, and we decided to target blokey blokes because, you know, they don't bake cupcakes. How are we going to get a new audience to fundraise for us? So we had this amazing photo shoot, not going to lie, I enjoyed it. We got the army to come in, and these big, strong, you know, bulky army guys in their uniform holding tiny 2-day-old kittens, and the catch line was, are you man enough to bake? And you know what? Cupcake income through the roof. Great. Really successful year. We were really proud of ourselves. Now, when we went and looked back at our demographics on who had fundraised for us, guess who had fundraised for us? Young women who came to the shelter really wanting to meet some of these men. Okay, so I'm not going to lie. The campaign was successful. We actually didn't achieve our behavior income on our desired target audience. So test it first, okay? If you still get the same income, you may not care. But it is important to know that you've gone the wrong direction. Measure, revise, and adapt. Please, please, please use data. I love data. I am that nerd that really likes data and can talk about it for ages. Adapt, change, even once you've implemented it because it was perfect. Keep changing, keep adapting because you may not find it remains to be the most successful campaign. Great example is a heuristic called choice architecture, which is simply making the choice that you want them to make more interesting. Okay, so in Munich, I think, they did this test on how do we get more people to take the stairs. So too many people were clogging up escalators at train stations, so they trialed these whole different series of things to make people take the stairs, from telling you how many calories you're burning, from giving you like, yay, go you, you're amazing on your way up the steps, from telling you like you're a terrible person because you take the escalator, to, you know, all these different things. And the thing that was the most successful was painting the stairs to look like piano keys. People enjoyed doing a little dance up the stairs. And it was great. And it worked so well. And it genuinely changed the amount of people taking the stairs by about 12 times the success of any of the other interventions for about 6 months. Because it wore off. The effect wore off. The novelty, the choice architecture stopped working after a little while. So you need to revise and adapt. You can have a super successful program, but if you don't continue to track it, you could continue to invest in the wrong thing after that. So, I think it's the system, not just the clicker. Sorry, Damien, can we go? Yeah, okay. So at the end of it, we go through and we do checks. So I've got this program, I've come up with all these ideas. Does it do lots of these things? Have I used my behavior change wheel? Does it matter why the change happened? And then just a whole bunch of list of heuristics. Now, you can just Google heuristics. Wikipedia will give you 45 million of them. The ones I talked about this morning was like 5. They're fun. They're great. Check. See how many you can use in a program. The more you use, the more successful, as long as you don't use ones that kind of counteract each other, because some do. Cool. Can we just go forward 2, please? The next slide just says, let's try it. So, on volunteers, we're going to do this process. So my boss comes to me and says, Jess, we need to increase the utilization of volunteers. Cool. It's a good outcome. I like that. What's the behavior outcome? I don't have any rubber ducks to throw at you, but I'll pretend. I'm sure Anne might donate me one. Woohoo, I've got one. I'm going to chuck a duck. What's the behavior outcome? Oh, we use the word engage. There's no action there. Well done. Okay, so was that you, Vicky? I probably can't throw any better than Anne. Got halfway there. So, really important distinction is people say things like, more volunteers turn up, or, increase volunteer numbers, or increase volunteer hours. They're all things that I need to do. There are multiple behavior outcomes in my one business outcome. So, slide please. My business objective, get more out of volunteers. My business outcomes, there's 4 that I decided in this situation. Increase volunteer hours, volunteers are more useful, more new volunteers, and volunteers stay longer, they have retention. They are still my business outcomes, but for each of those business outcomes, I need a behavior outcome. So, to increase volunteer hours, my behavior outcome is existing volunteers stay for more hours. Okay, so it has to move away from what I'm going to do to who's going to do it and what's the action. Okay, now if you do that well, you end up with a really big tree. This is just a tiny, tiny, tiny middle tree. What you can do is decide, okay, well, I've got 12 different target audiences. I'm going to pick the 1 or the 2 that I know are going to have the most impact. Again, be careful. You are probably making assumptions about those audiences, but a lot of us cannot do every single target audience, so we do choose to limit that based on the likelihood of having substantial difference, or sometimes simply on who we have the resources to change. So, in this particular situation, here's one I prepared earlier. Okay, so we end up with behavior outcome that I'm wanting, target audience. Now, in this particular situation, for all of my different business outcomes, my target audience was actually the same. Retirees, students, empty nesters, and specialist groups, okay? Because they were my existing biggest volunteer people that I already had. They were also probably the biggest targets I wanted to attract out there in the community. So as it turned out in this situation, my behavior outcomes all had the same target audiences. That may not be true in all situations. And we then sat down with members of each of these groups and we said, why aren't you spending longer? What makes you go home? Or why aren't you volunteering for us if you're not a volunteer? What are the barriers? Okay, so just some examples. Probably going to click through some of these quite quickly. This one, retirees were our biggest number, so we did do a bit of focus on them. Now, I'm not going to lie, out of this, some of this came up to be not super behaviour change focused, but we'd follow the process, so we still knew that we were implementing the right help for their identified barriers to change. Transport was their single biggest barrier. We brainstormed, we went nuts, we went blue sky, we went with, can we buy a shuttle bus? Clearly we could not afford that, we were a small shelter. But we, at this brainstorming exercise, you don't rule out things on that basis, okay? We decided what we might want to do was have some taxi rides donated or some bus rides donated or anything like that. Whether we wanted, the young volunteers who are students who usually have cars to pick up an oldie on the way, or whether we wanted a driving volunteer. We decided on all of these things. And in the end, we actually managed to implement quite a fun campaign we did for a while that when you were catching your taxi and you gave them a 20 and it was only 18, that $2 went towards getting an oldie to the RSPCA. That was quite a fun campaign. We did only run that on a temporary trial basis. it was a pilot. It was quite successful, but we hadn't then managed to go through to the implementation phase. But a lot of this is really just about breaking down barriers rather than actual changing behaviour. One of the ones in this example, though, that we did do to nudge is we used to offer rides whenever volunteers wanted to leave, and we stopped doing that. We actually took away a convenience, which sounds bad, but we just started offering rides every 2.5 hours. So you kind of either were stuck here for 2.5 hours or you were stuck here for 5, take your pick. But nobody was only there for 1, so it was quite interesting. So those sorts of things are interesting. One of the other big ones that I will really want to stress for oldies particularly was that some of the reasons they didn't come was mental health issues and social isolation and depression. So we did a lot of work on creating social cohesiveness. We had free tea and coffee at 10:15 every day. And yeah, I'm not saying that all of their hours at the shelter were more productive, but they were certainly at the shelter. And we started creating little groups that they could get involved in. So we had the puppy posse and the kitty cohort and the bunny brigade and things that people felt they were a part of, my little group of friends. And these weren't, you couldn't only retirees join these programs, and in fact it was way more positive to have young people with the older people. My favourite one that came out of it, we had Play Pal days. We really wanted to implement something like RSPCA Queensland's Happy Paws, Happy Hearts thing. We just did not have the budget and the resources for big stuff like that. So in the end, we went with Play Pal days, and once every second month, we got the local kindergarten to bring in their kids, and we bust in a bunch of oldies, and the kids and the puppies and the old people played together, and it was lots of fun, and everybody loved it. Next slide, please. Going through really quickly, one of the other ones we did, one of their other barriers is they didn't feel we communicated with them very well, because in this modern age, we used Facebook, we used emails, and all of those sorts of things, and they just weren't really feeling like they knew what was going on. So we implemented a Gossip Girls team. It was your job to gossip and tell everybody what you know. Quite a successful campaign, needless to say. We also gave them some leadership jobs, some ownership of groups, because one of the things that they said was a barrier is that they felt a bit useless. They felt a little bit like they were kind of in the way. But more importantly, the group that we applied the most sort of fun and controversial, some of you will frown at me for this, okay? The group that we did for the other kind of end of this, which is how do we get more new people to volunteer? We use the target audience of empty nesters, and their biggest barriers were around too many places to volunteer, too many choices, not enough time, basically, and time kind of priorities. So we actually decided to use the heuristic of loss aversion and scarcity. So we stopped making it easier for volunteers to volunteer for us, which is controversial, and we made it harder. We did what zoos do, and we said, it's really competitive. This is a unique opportunity. Nobody gets to just play with puppies. That is not a free activity. This is awesome experience. Apply for the privilege of volunteering with us. Now, this doesn't work for everybody. For some people, depending on your needs and situation, the being super available, super easy works, okay? For us, my volunteer coordinator was also my foster coordinator, my marketing coordinator, and my fundraising coordinator. She couldn't be there for everybody all of the time. So we had to find a way that made people stay longer, put in more effort, and got people to think why ours was better than volunteering with St. John or any of those other places. So we went down the line of totally being something that's hard to get into. Controversial, but something worth thinking about. Can we advance? Oh, there you go. Okay, this is just very quickly, ease versus impact chart. This is, most people have seen this, how hard it is versus how successful it's likely to be. When you've done your blue sky thinking, go nuts, but put them all on here. And you obviously, if it's easy and has a high impact, go nuts. If it's hard and has a low impact, probably next decades. But obviously the other ones, they're your ones to consider. Ooh, I work again, okay? So obviously then we went through, checked, how many have we used? Have we had fun? Is this great? And the biggest thing is to know that there is no silver bullet. We didn't just come up with one thing that works. That's very rare. We tried multiple different things, and that's your most successful option. At the end of the day, huge increases in everything. I'm being hurried, so I won't talk about them for very long, but we did good, basically. Okay, the numbers prove it, all right? And my volunteer coordinator was able to actually be a more successful fundraising coordinator because she had more time. So, what does that mean for you if you don't have volunteers, or if you do have volunteers and maybe this doesn't suit you? That effectively means it's fine. Follow the process for what's important to you, or I can come and help you with that. But the short version is those 8 steps, do them by the book, do the process properly. You will end up with multiple things for multiple things. If you don't have a big tree at the end of it, you probably haven't done it thoroughly enough. I know that sounds like the boring part of this really fun topic, but if you want to do it well, okay? Other than that, have fun. Try to think differently, challenge yourself. Next time you have a problem and you're going straight back to, oh, well, you know, we could just get more volunteers to increase people, you know, stop and go, there's got to be another way of doing this. Let's give that process a go. Cool?